we're going to be in Exodus 21 today. I'm going to just read the first verse. We'll start here. So Exodus 21:1. Now these are the ordinance which you are to set before them. And just to set the stage, I want us to go back and look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 24. So, oh, no, not 24. I put 24, but it's not 24. Where do I want to start? Sorry, I'm still a little jet lagged when I did this yesterday. Well, let me start in 18 and then we'll cover it all. So Exodus chapter 20 beginning in verse 18. And if you'll remember, so God, we have Mount Sinai, we have all of Israel at the base of Mount Sinai, and then God came down. There's fire, there's thunder, there's lightning, smoke. It's just a very fearful, in a holy, reverent sort of way, scene. And God speaking the 10 Commandments, also called the 10 Words, from the top of Mount Sinai in the hearing of all of Israel. So everyone can hear. And then when we pick up in verse 18, and all the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled. They stood at a distance. Then they said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, lest we die." And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin." So he was revealing his reverence and his holiness, and this is going to motivate them, or it's supposed to, motivate them to not sin. Just seeing the reverence here. So the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. So they beg for a mediator, which is pointing us to the gospel, but they're begging for a mediator. So Moses is going to mediate on their behalf. And so Moses goes up on the mountain. So when we start 21, it's just Moses and God. And so it's not the hearing of all the people anymore. Moses is going to be the mediator of this covenant from this point forward. I had 24 in there, and I'll tell you why. 24 says, "You shall make an altar of earth for me." And I know we covered this so thoroughly 2 weeks ago, but I just want to say it again. When we go through the 10 Commandments, it's often said, "Oh, they're so negative. Thou shalt not, thou shalt not." They're so negative. But the thing is, the "thou shalt not," the people are so free. They're free with a few limitations. I mean, there's just a few limitations, but for the most part, they're free with few boundaries or limitations. But when it comes to the worship of God, and we'll cover this again when we get to the Levites, but when it comes to the worship of God, you shall make an altar of earth. There's not a lot of freedom here. I mean, it's prescribed very directly, very narrowly, how we are to worship him. And he's going to be very specific in this. And as I was saying it in the back of my head, I couldn't help but think about the judges and when everyone did what was right in their own mind. When it comes to the worship of God, we are not free to do what seems right in our own mind. We are given very strict guidelines on how to approach him. Like I said, we'll see it again when we get to the Levites and them approaching God. Okay. I didn't say it last time, so I thought, I want to say it because it bugged me that I didn't. So now in picking up in Exodus 21:1, now these are the ordinance which you are to set before them. So now he's speaking to Moses, and he's going to tell Moses the ordinances. And remember also, we're taking this people group, we're taking this, what started as a family, and they're being birthed into a nation. So he's setting them apart, and he's going to give them laws. And one of the things I've tried to look at as we go is how they're going to be different from the surrounding people. I mean, these laws are going to separate them. They're going to be very different from the Egyptians, which we'll look at today, and the Midian. They're just different. They're being set apart. And these laws, we've talked about this too, but like you just think about your own home, your house rules reflect your character. What you allow your kids to watch, not watch, curfews, the list goes on. But those reflect the values of the parents, your house rules. And so these guidelines, these are rules, these are laws, God's law, these laws reflect God's character, and you can see what's important to him. And there'll be some that may not apply specifically, but we still can glean from God's character and what's important to him, what he values, how to please him. And it also reveals our sinful nature, that we have to have these laws. And some of them you're like, what prompted that law? And it's just God knows our nature, and without him we would tend to go that direction. And so we'll look for those things as we go. Okay, so picking up in Exodus chapter 21, and I'm going to read 2 through 11, so this is a good hunk. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the 7th he shall go out as a free man without payment. If he comes along, he shall go out alone. If he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to the master, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out as a free man, then his master shall bring him to God, then he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently. And if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He does not have authority to sell her to a foreign people because of his unfairness to her. And if he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her marital conjugal rights. And if he will not do these 3 things for her, then she shall go out for nothing without payment of money. So we're going to start out here in verse 2 and talk about Hebrew slave. So when you get later into the law, there's provision for foreigners who serve as slaves, but here is specifically Hebrew slaves. So it's talking about they're being set apart as a nation. It's how to deal with your fellow Hebrew people. So if you buy a Hebrew slave, and the other thing, I like thinking we're going to look at the biblical view of slavery, and it's very different than what we may think of, in history. This is a very different. It was it was actually an agreement. Like help me out if you, but there was a formal contract even.
It's more like being a hired laborer, that this is to pay a debt, and so it's not a permanent condition, it's not a demeaning position, it's a way to pay your debts and to live with a family and have your room and board and things like that. This was for poor people who had no other options.
I mean, it's actually a kindness.
Yeah.
It's actually an absolute kindness. And I read 2 examples that one would really apply here, but like a professional athlete, while they're owned by the team, they're under a contract. I'll do this for you and you do this for me. I mean, it's a mutual, it's not a demeaning degrade, it's a mutual
So like
just
an
relationship.
indentured servant?
Yeah, yes.
Only treated better.
Yes, they were treated like family. And of course, at this point in our study, we've had all of Genesis, and you see examples of. I thought of Abraham and Eliezer. We had Hagar, which that didn't turn out well, but it started well. Rachel and Leah had their maidservants. I mean, it was they bring them in their family. Treated more like family. The other example they used was military, where you agree to serve for this amount of time, and then as we see here, it's not permanent, at the end of 6 years, they're free to go. And then they have the option to continue this relationship or to move on. But it was not a permanent. And I couldn't help but think how Exodus starts out. We see Pharaoh and the Hebrew slaves, and this is so contrary to what slavery looked like in Egypt. So contrary to what they had known just a few.
And our mind generally goes to the slavery that was in the United
Yes,
States, and it's not at all the same.
It's not
That's
at
why
all.
yeah,
I know, and that's right.
why people get all mad about
Yes,
biblical slavery because there's
yes, they don't have
looking
any
at it
idea.
through that,
Right.
yeah.
Yes, and that's just not it at all. It was a very,
Right.
it was actually an actual kindness, and like she said, working off a debt. Well, you couldn't charge interest to your fellow Jews at all. You couldn't charge them interest, and so you work this many years, your debt's paid, and then you go. And it was actually a kindness to get you out of debt.
This is way off, but a question. Do Orthodox Jews in their banking, do they charge interest to other Jews today?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't know. I know that the scripture did not allow for it
Here.
at all. Yeah, it was not to charge interest. And I forgot to mention this, but let's just remember they had been slaves for 430 years to the very day, the Bible tells us. So they had been in slavery, and then they left in the middle of the first month, which would have been Nisan. And now we're in the third month. So, 45, 50 days that they've been free. So, this is all so fresh. The contrast in the slavery and what they'd seen God do. And I love to think about God did all these amazing things in Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, destroying the Egyptian army, and manna from heaven, water from a rock. And then he says, here's my law, follow me. But he does all of that first. He set them free, delivered them. Just a kindness, and just his kindness and his goodness. And then he says, follow me. Okay, so we're back in Exodus 21, verse 2. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the 7th he shall go out as a free man without payment. So at the end, he didn't have to redeem himself or pay a fee. At the end, they're free. So contrary to Pharaoh. He kept them in slavery, and it was not an option. And this is just for a season, and then you're free to go if you want.
So was Jacob like a slave?
I know, yes. I'm so glad you said that. Yes. I even had that in my notes, and I overlooked it. Yes. So Jacob, it was interesting reading about how the different contracts could have gone. So with Jacob, he meets Rachel. So he works for Laban for 7 years, and then he's given his compensation. And that was one thing you could agree, then you do your years, and you get your compensation in a lump sum at the end of the term. Then, it wasn't really Rachel, it was Leah. Surprise. So then, he immediately marries Rachel, after he gives Leah her week. Then he marries Rachel, and then he's indebted. So he gets the lump sum at the beginning of the contract, and then he serves it out. And then he was free to go, I guess, but then he worked 6 more years for livestock. And that would have been exactly how it would have worked. Exactly how it would have worked. It was a mutual, it wasn't abusive or demeaning. It was a mutual agreement. Okay. So thank you for pointing that out. Anything else? Okay. Then verse 3. This is just, these are just the details that, reveal about God, that it's common sense. Both parties are going to be pleased. It's fair on both sides. And yet that he gives such attention. And, so we have the 10 Commandments, and these are like giving more detail of the 10 Commandments. Or, I don't know what the word is, but giving more detail, expounding upon them. And so here says, if he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. So you leave as you came. At the end of your 6 years, if you want to go, you leave as you came. Now, here's another scenario. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out alone. Now, this, from what I read, not having lived in this time, but what I read, they would have had an option to redeem to purchase their wife and children. But it was like with Rachel and Leah, you had to work for them, or there was a price that went with them. Especially if the master gives him a wife. So not only did he have an investment in her, but then her childbearing. And so he could go with the wife, but he would have the option to redeem her from slavery, and that was an option.
Was that also 7 years?
Yeah, at the end of 6 years, yes, you can go, and then whatever they worked out agreement wise to compensate for taking the female.
Okay.
Right, that would have been an additional whatever they worked
But
out.
not necessarily another 7 years.
No, not necessarily. Mm-mm. It could have been, but not necessarily. And the same way with the children. This is the other thing, like keeping in mind as we look at these, marriages were arranged. Like there was no marriage. I mean, it had to have been arranged. Someone had to have agreed. And we're going to kind of see the master with the female servants, female slaves, were master, but they were also kind of a father. And if this was your slave, then like when the fathers had to arrange marriages, or there was a dowry, we call it the bridal price that you would have paid to the father. This will go to the master, and the master had the right to arrange her marriage the way a father would his daughter, if he owned her. Then verse 5. So we have another scenario. If the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, and I will not go out as a free man. Which, I mean, that just, well, of course it's pointing to the gospel when we have the servant-master relationship with God, where it's a choice, and they chose, I love him, I want to stay, I'm well provided for, he's good to me, he's fair, and a good provider. He could, provide housing and room and board. And so this, I like it here. This is a good situation for me and my family. I'll stay. And he would continue to work for the man. Of course, everything here was agricultural, livestock and farming, and everything was family. I mean, you were dependent on your sons and your family for the crops and the livestock and just caring for that. It was family.
So he was set free, and he decides to stay because why? Was he then a slave again, or was he a free man again?
No, and that's what it's then.
He remained free, working for the master.
No. He was saying, "I'm committed to you for life. I want to spend the rest of my life working for you, your family, your farm."
In the same way as a slave before.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but if he's a good man,
Sure.
I mean, we see Eliezer and Abraham. That's the one that kept coming in my mind. Because had Abraham not had heirs, all of his inheritance would have gone to Eliezer. I mean, it's a relationship. If you've ever had a good boss or worked in a good situation, I mean, it was a good, healthy.
This might be a little off the beaten track, but say a family had loaned out their inheritance until the year of Jubilee, and they have no land to go back to. This might be an option for, I'm going to work for this family, and then maybe my children or my relatives can redeem our inheritance later, but we can't afford it or whatever.
That is a great picture, because we've already talked about that. At the end of Jubilee, everything had to go back to the rightful owner. So you're right, that would be a perfect situation if you sell your inheritance for a season, and then at the end it would go back. Yeah, excellent. So, back to verse, I'm going to read 5 and 6. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, my children, I will not go out as a free man, then his master shall bring him to God, and he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently. So, when it says bring him before God, from what I understood, they would take him to the tabernacle and to the priest, and this was a public. Would have been a public proclamation or announcement, and then the new master would pierce his ear, and then that was a sign to everyone. I have a good master. I love him. I want to serve him, and master, this is my servant for life, permanent. And so they would have been continued in the slave relationship, but a healthy win-win. Win-win situation. But yeah, they would pierce their ear to show their permanent. But this is where we get the idea in the New Testament where you willingly serve the Lord. You're not forced. I love him. He's good to me. I willingly take this role as servant. That's I always think of Matthew 7, but when they say, Lord, Lord, and he says, depart from me, I never knew you, they're calling him master, but they were not serving as servants at all. Okay, so verse 7. And if a man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do, which on the surface may sound harsh, but it's actually such a kindness because women couldn't work, they couldn't own anything. The master could not just leave them destitute at all. If they had one, they had to keep her on and make sure she was cared for. And this is actually an amazing kindness. She was not to go free as the male slaves do. So at the end of 6 years, she doesn't go and just left destitute. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. So she could be purchased, her life could be purchased, she could be redeemed out of his, out from underneath him, she could be redeemed. So that was a kindness. Just know she can't be left destitute. We can just all take comfort in that. She could not be left abandoned. He does not have authority to sell her to a foreign people. Love that, because we've seen what the Egyptians do to their slaves, and then the others, they were cruel. They were not to be sold to a foreigner at all. It had to be a fellow Jew. And then verse 9, and if he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. So that's where we talked about the arranged marriages, and he could give her in marriage. He had the authority to do that, give her in marriage, and he could designate her for his son.
So if she doesn't please her master who he selected for himself, is he basically divorcing her?
I don't think divorce is the right, because they were not married. Okay, wait, say that again.
Okay.
Am I hearing?
Because it says if she doesn't please him, and he selected
Right.
her for himself,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
and because later it says if it's going to be his son's wife, then he treats her like a daughter. So is he divorcing her, even though she still maintains in the household?
I don't know.
It might be more of a, he made an agreement with her father that, okay,
Right.
she's going to serve and I will marry her at the end, and then if he decides not to marry her, it might be considered a divorce situation, but it sounds like this isn't like a consummation. He hasn't completely married her. It would have been, if he breaks the contract, then her family would probably get a choice, or, okay, I'm not going to marry her, but my son will.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Jewish
Okay, good.
men sound like they have much more restraint than a common man.
Well, but doesn't that just tell you that why God had to put this in place? Because we would not do this naturally. This would not be our natural instinct to be that kind to, they would just leave her.
Every other society, a female slave would just expect expect to be a sex slave as well.
Yes.
Exactly. Yes.
But it does say
Exactly.
if he marries another woman, he's still gotta supply her
Yes.
with food, clothing,
Yes.
and marital rights.
Yes, you absolutely cannot. Yes.
But they could have multiple wives.
Right. And that's what Hannah's husband did.
Yes.
Where he still took care of her even though he had another wife. That Hannah
Mhm.
wasn't having children, so okay, I'm gonna
Right.
marry somebody else to have descendants.
Yes. I mean, and that's an excellent example because it's after. All of them I would think were in Genesis, but that's after the law, even. And so, yes, absolutely. I just flung my pen. Okay, excellent questions. Okay, so then verse 9. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters. So, like I said, just the kindness that he shows towards women. Just so thoughtful and thorough in their care. And if he takes him to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or her conjugal rights. And if he will not do these three things for her, then she shall go out for nothing without payment of money. So in other words, maybe return to her family, but there's no bridal price, there's no compensation. He just loses a slave in that case. Okay, do we have any other thoughts or questions on that section?
Now, I'm assuming, it doesn't say, but this is my assumption. When the master, the servant wants to stay, he gets his ear pierced, the master dies, does that mean they're automatically free to go? Do we know?
I don't know.
I mean, what
I
happens
mean, I would
then?
think.
Like, do they serve the son if there's a son? But like in the case of, can't even think of the names, but, some of the slaves got their master's inheritance, so what did that make them then?
That's interesting. I don't know.
And also the women, were they cared for upon the master's death by the extended
I think they would.
family?
I think they would have been part of the inheritance.
Oh, okay,
Like you would have passed on
okay.
that
Somebody would have
inheritance.
gotten it, whether it was a son in the household or if there were no
Right.
sons, maybe the eldest slave or
Right,
whatever. and Somebody
exactly.
would have gotten them.
Yes.
Somebody.
Right. Because I mean,
Their care was insured.
yes, yes, absolutely, yes. Which is what makes this so amazing. Just the the sovereignty of God, and yet the personal
Right.
care and just
I mean, you think of how they were divided into their different tribes,
Mhm.
so it's almost like odds are the person they were working for was like a distant cousin. It's these were close communities,
very
so.
yes, and very family, and it's all just if we can think agriculture, farm, harvest. So there were so many workers needed, to care for these things. So it was a need, and so I think that whoever took over the family, became the patriarch of the family, would have inherited all that's under, if that makes sense.
Well, in a lot of ways, it would take care of the homeless too,
Yes.
and it would take care of your whole need for a DHS or whatever.
Mhm.
Because
Yes,
you have
right.
people,
Right.
all right, you're going to work for me. I'm going to provide for your needs, but you're going to have a job.
Right, it's work. Yes. What does the New Testament say? Man doesn't work, doesn't need. Yes. It's so, and I'm thinking about Ruth. I mean, it
That's what I was thinking.
preserves your dignity.
Right.
I mean, you can still eat, but you preserve your dignity. So, yeah, and it's interesting you say that because just in the overall picture reading, I was reading about what they consider the wisdom literature, and like the Egyptian wisdom literature, like your goal was to get to a place where you never had to do anything for yourself, like someone feeds you grapes and feeds you. Where in the biblical, in our wisdom literature, work is so revered. It's an honor, it's a privilege, and it's highly thought of in the Hebrew culture. Biblically speaking, laboring, sweat of your brow, I mean, it's honored. Whereas in Egypt, it would not. Your goal
Preserving the
was
family line is an honor.
yes,
Because, I think that's one
Yes.
reason Boaz took Ruth,
yes.
was to preserve that family line.
There's just so many things that set them apart from the other Okay. Okay, I'm going to read 12 through 14. He who strikes a man so that he dies shall surely be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him fall into his hand, then I will appoint you a place to which you may flee. If, however, a man acts presumptuously towards his neighbor so as to kill him craftily, you are to take him even from my altar, that he may die. So this is just an FYI, and you can fill in the blanks or help me out if you can, but it's a very common, which we learned about when we did Esther, but it's a common writing style, and it's called chiastic. It's a chiastic structure, and it's like a sandwich or bookends. You begin and end with the same thing, and then the middle's a little different. And so here we have, he who strikes a man so that he dies, he shall surely be put to death. And it went, if a man acts presumptuously towards his neighbor so as to kill him craftily, take him even from my altar, he must die. And then the middle one is if it's not premeditated. And I love how God in his just amazing infinite wisdom makes provision for a distinction between premeditated murder and accidental, involuntary, I think we would say in our
If
law.
one of those people were to flee to a sanctuary city, would their family move there with them?
I don't think, no. I mean, you had to stay on your land and you had crops to, no.
But if there was no one to take care of their family?
Oh, well, no. Just the moral of the story, don't murder.
So what was in those cities? Just a bunch of guys?
Well, I think that there were I can't remember. We did this when we did the murdering. They had cities of refuge where they would go, and I think the priests
The
were,
Levites,
I think,
those were the
right.
refuge cities.
And so I think there was still plenty of work to be done out,
But it was the end of his life as he knew it.
it was like a life in prison.
Yeah.
Right. And that's for involuntary, and only if you make it before the Avenger of the Blood got you. If he got you first, then.
But if Jubilee came, didn't they get to go back?
I think it was the death of the high priest.
Yeah, it had, on this,
Okay.
only the death of the high priest.
Okay, I
Right.
knew there was something that
Yes, the
happened.
death of the
and
high
they could go
priest,
back.
then they could go back.
Jubilee's just for property, wasn't it?
Mm.
Probably.
And slavery. There were a lot of right,
It
deaths.
was like a Sabbath year too.
Mhm. Yeah.
Ever for 49 years, if you made it that long.
I know. Yes.
Now, this unintentional murder is
Yes.
totally unintentional, like an accident?
Let's read and see what it says. Okay. But if he did not lie in wait for him, but God let him, the wording is so intriguing there. But if God let him fall into his hands, then I will appoint a place to which he may flee. And remember, all these would come before a judge, and a judge would determine premeditation or, accidental. This would all come before a judge. Even in the cities of refuge, they would come before a judge.
I think there's also further laws that distinguish
Yes.
different scenarios.
Yes.
The axe head.
Yeah,
Yes.
An
Yes.
accident, I don't know if this allows for a crime of passion kind of thing of, someone is sinning against,
Right.
your daughter and you attack him and he dies, then,
Right. As you get further into, there's more law to come, which
Yeah.
they do lay out even more detailed circumstances. But here, he's just clearly making.
But if you go
Big
after
picture.
the person with intent maybe not to kill, but you do kill, that's what
Yes.
it's talking about, right?
Right, like she talked about, there's a whole scenario about an axe head. If you're chopping wood
Yes.
and your axe head flies off and it kills someone, that would be unintentional. Clearly unintentional.
but you still have to flee.
But you still have to
They
flee,
still
and you
have to
still
flee
go
now.
to the city. Right, it's still, life is valuable. I mean, life has value, and so you want to be, careful in what you do. You want to, be careful with your axe and your axe head. Because life is valuable, and so I think that says a lot about the value of life. That if someone dies, there is a penalty to be paid. But very different if it's intentional. And then in verse 4, if, however, a man acts presumptuously towards his neighbor so as to kill him craftily, you are to take him even from my altar that he may die. So it was little unclear, but maybe they would run to the priest, run to the altar, try to find sanctuary in the tabernacle, and yet it doesn't matter. If you're guilty, you're guilty, and there's no place to go if you're guilty.
There's also the provision that in order for somebody to be put to death, there has to be 2 witnesses.
Exactly, yes.
So,
You would have to come before all of this. You'd have to come before a judge. There would be a trial, and the judge would determine. Yes, absolutely. Lots of. Okay. But you couldn't run to the altar and say, "You can't catch me here," because like people, come hide in church and think you can't get arrested. Similar. Okay. Any thoughts or questions on that aspect? Okay.
Did you mean a productive question?
No? Any question? No, we love questions. That's what makes it interesting. Okay. No? Okay. No, doesn't have to be relevant. Okay.
But you think of how murder is just so rampant today.
I know.
And,
No value of life.
and God
No
set
respect.
Yeah.
stringent guidelines.
And I mean, like when we were looking at thou shalt not murder, I mean, it was so clear that your land was not cleansed unless the person who committed the murder was punished properly. And, I mean, it's like, it was just reading it and studying it out like that. I mean, it's very important that if you take a life, you are punished for taking that life. Life for life, very, very, very important.
Well, this protects the victim.
Yes.
Whereas today's society, the victim is responsible for their own death.
Right, and right. Yes.
I mean, that's the way it's.
Right.
set
It's
up
very right.
there's
Yeah.
also more capital offenses in the law than what we have now.
Yes,
We're about to
exactly.
look at that.
Yes, exactly. I know. This is. Let me read 15 through 17. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. And he who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or he is found in possession, shall surely be put to death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. So again, we have beginning and ending with, really restating the 5th commandment, honor your mother and father. And this is one of those areas as a parent, if I could have overs, this is one. Just reading this and studying this, it's the death penalty to not honor your mother and father. If you strike your mother or your father, cursing your mother and father, it's the death penalty. That tells us this is so important to teach our kids to honor their parents, but to honor authority. And it's that important because we're talking about as they're setting apart and they're becoming a nation. The health, the stability of this nation is dependent on respecting authority. And when you don't have respect for authority, you've got an out-of-control society. And so it was so important. It was so important to God. And I just, we live in such a self-esteem, build their self-esteem, don't tell them no, don't use red ink, can't give them zeros. I can go on and on. Respecting and honoring authority is so important, and
It teaches you how to love God.
It
Because
does.
if you don't respect authority on earth, how are you ever going to respect His authority?
It has to do with the eternal soul of our children. If they don't learn to respect mother and father, they will never respect God and His Word. Absolutely not. And when we make exceptions and we're a little wishy-washy, well, you can just know that you know that you know. God is not, and we're just setting them up for.
Okay, question.
Yes.
Verse 16. Anybody who kidnaps or
Yes.
sells somebody.
Yes.
What did that do for the 11 brothers?
See,
who
that's
did
what
away
I
with
was thinking about
I
that,
know.
too.
Yes. Well, again, does this not reveal human nature? Without Christ, our flesh nature. We saw, you're right, the brothers get jealous and then just go, this tells us that's our natural tendency. And it's very sobering to think that our flesh
It
nature
also
is.
tells you they lived all those years with the knowledge that they
Yes.
committed a crime that they could die for.
Well, but see, that
and
was
lied
before
about
the
it.
law. They didn't have the law yet. But that shows you what our natural flesh nature will do out of envy and jealousy. You just,
The law prohibits a lot of things that happen in
Yes.
Genesis. Like, the law specifically says you cannot marry a pair of sisters.
Rachel Leah.
Because we've seen what happens when we try that.
Exactly.
So,
Yes.
It's kind of funny how it's not a contradiction, but it shows,
Right.
okay, we're learning from these mistakes now.
Well, it just reveals our natural tendency. If we don't have these laws, that's what we're going to do. That is what our human nature is going to do if we don't have these laws to restrain human nature. And then, of course, for us, when we're born again and we're a new creation, our mind's being renewed, you know, we're being renewed in that, but we still need the law to restrain while we're in the, you know, sanctification mode, you know, as we're being sanctified. Hopefully, you know, we're being renewed in that. But it's still the flesh nature, it's just sinful. Our flesh nature is sinful. Yes, just sinful.
So all the other past prior sins were like, this is a case of do as I say, not as I did.
Right. Or like she
Or
said,
there are
learn from your
circumstances.
mistakes. This is why we have this law, because this is our natural tendency, and it doesn't go well. It's not going to end well. Okay.
There's a verse in Proverbs about if you disrespect your parents, like the ravens will come and pluck your eyes out. And my mom said she had a friend who would like tap on the window if you guys were being mad. She's like, the ravens are coming for your eyes.
That is so good. That is good. Yeah. I mean, and of course we read it when we studied this earlier, but I mean they would take the rebellious child out, stone him, and leave the heap of stones as a reminder to every other child who thought about rebelling. This is how it ends. I mean, it was just, but it seems like such a strong. Now, this is where I think we can say this doesn't mean go, you know, we need to go make legislation for American law that you stone your rebellious child. But for you and I as believers, this shows us how important it is to God that we teach respect to authority. And like I said, eternity is at stake with our kids. If they don't learn to respect us, they'll never understand how to make God's word the ultimate authority in their life. So very, very, very important. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on that section? Okay, moving right on. Read 18 and 19. And if men have a quarrel, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but remains in bed, if he gets up and walks around outside on his staff, then he who struck him shall go unpunished. He shall only pay for his loss of time, and shall take care of him until he's completely healed. And again, this is just so fair. Like when I was reading through this, I try to put myself in both situations. I'm the one who hit with a fist and injured someone, or you know, the injured person, and it's just so fair on both parties. It just does not favor one party over the other. Like what you know, it doesn't favor the victim at all. It's very fair.
This is workman's compensation.
It is. It is. It's just, yes. It's just such wisdom. So, and if men have a quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, so this is obviously out of anger. If they're quarreling, it's in anger. And he does not die, but remains in bed. If he gets up and walks around outside on his staff, then he who struck him shall go unpunished. But that just means an additional, I mean, obviously there are consequences. And so he's got to compensate the man for the time he can't work. He's got to compensate his time. And he has to take care of him until he's fully healthy. And of course you would be overly interested in getting them healthy and back to work because you're paying for their time while they're out. So it was just, it's so...
And do not some countries do this today, like if you were in a car wreck and you injured another person, you were at fault, then you're to take care of that person until they're back in full health?
I don't know,
I
but it's
think that's what
brilliant.
Well, I think Venezuela
In
does it.
some Asian countries do that, like you have to pay for their medical bills.
I
I
think
think
Venezuela does.
That's
too.
just brilliant. I mean, it's just brilliant. And it's just fair and just on both sides.
But
And,
isn't it an attempt to reconcile the relationship?
oh, I didn't even think about that.
Because we do something similar with this to our kids. If they have an altercation,
Right.
This weekend, Aiden and Liam were fighting with each other. One was saying words the other didn't like. Aiden pushed Liam.
Mm-hmm.
Aiden is bigger than Liam by 4 years,
Yeah.
So, Aiden had to do something nice for Liam to help
Okay.
reconcile the relationship.
That's
I think
great.
I had him,
Yeah.
Liam really loves trains, so I had Aiden build him a really nice train truck
Yes.
setup to play
Yes.
with,
Okay.
to help reconcile the
Yes.
relationship. That's kind of, I guess, how I see this. You
Okay.
do these things to help reconcile the relationship.
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it would. Yeah.
Which makes it, I think, even more amazing that, like, in the case of the Good Samaritan, he was not at fault for the injury, but he did
still
the same
nursed him.
thing.
Yes. That is a great point. Yes. Yeah. Okay. 20 and 21. And if a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod and he dies at his hand, he shall be punished. If, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property. This one was a little,
Yeah, punish, what is punishment?
well, but see, you'd have to go before the judges, and the judge would determine
The punishment.
and two witnesses and right. So there's a very fair trial that will go into play to make those determinations. Whether it was intended, but it because they're under contract, the master did have authority to discipline the slaves when they weren't living up to their end of the contract. It was within their right to discipline, and when they weren't living up to their
We have such a different mindset in this day and time. It is hard to comprehend a lot of these laws.
yes.
But we weren't there. We weren't there then.
Right, but you can see how this makes such a very healthy society. This would make if you were the under contract, the worker under contract, you would want to live up to your end of the contract. I mean, you just do what you've agreed to do, and so this is meant to.
And also, it's hard to imagine, this is a lot of people that these laws are being, they didn't come out there with just a handful of people.
No,
This is a
600,000
lot of people
men
already.
plus women and children. So easily
Yeah.
2 million,
It's
1,800.
not in the master's best interest to go about killing his workers. So this would
Exactly.
be kind of, again, an accident or rare event. It's,
Exactly.
you're not gonna, murder your employees.
But that's what's so amazing about the law. It kept everyone accountable. Because the law is so just on both sides. It kept right. You wouldn't want to injure your worker because then who's going to work? And then if you're the worker, you want to live up to your end of the contract because you can be punished if you don't. It's just such a perfect balance. So then in verse 21, if, however, he survives a day or two, no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property. So in other words, the worker should have lived up to his end of the agreement, and if he lives a day or two, it shows that the master was not trying to kill him, just discipline and rein in. And so no vengeance shall be taken, for he is his property. Just live up to your contract.
The punishment is that you have lost a worker.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Exactly. Okay. Let's see. 22 through 25. And if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with child so that she has a miscarriage, yet there is no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judge decides. But if there is any further injury, then you shall appoint as a penalty life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Okay, so we have to talk about this because it says if the woman has a miscarriage, and I think that this is probably not a good translation from everything I read in the other. Right, gives
My
birth,
footnotes say something different.
give birth prematurely, and I think that's really what
Yeah.
the original language was portraying, is to give birth prematurely. So, but no death, just premature birth. And so, so if two men are fighting and they act, I mean, it's just so interesting the scenarios that are given here. And if men struggle with each other and strike a woman with a child so that she, and we're just going to say delivers prematurely, but the baby's fine and the mother's fine, yet there are no further injury, he shall surely be fined as the woman's husband may demand of him, and he shall pay as the judge decides. So he's got to face the husband and the judge, and whatever, hearing the whole story and two witnesses, they'll determine a proper punishment for this.
It happened a lot. It sounds so
I
specific.
know. That's what I mean. It's so fascinating.
Two men are arguing. They accidentally strike a pregnant woman. She gives premature birth. It's like,
I know. What are the odds of all those happening at once?
all these different scenarios we could put in here. This is the one.
I thought it was
Like-
so intriguing.
It's intriguing, for
There's
sure.
got to be more to it, but just on the surface, this is,
It could be the husband fighting too.
yes. Yeah, I mean, just,
Wives are just
I think this
I
might
just
not be
don't
as uncommon in our day as what we, in some
that's a
cultures.
good point. Yeah. Yes,
as
you're
we think.
right. Yes, you're right. You're right. So he would be fined, wherever the husband and the judge. And I thought that's interesting. The husband has a say in this. But if there is injury, then you shall appoint a penalty, life for life. And this is where we get life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. It sounds vindictive, but I want you to see that it's actually perfect, and it's not vindictive. It's actually meaning the punishment has to fit the crime. You can't burn yourself with a cup of coffee and then sue for $10 gajillion. It's that's what I thought of when I read burn for burn. I mean, you can't. The punishment has to fit the crime. It's just restraining our flesh nature and refraining from outrageous revenge. It's restraint. It's not vengeance. It's restraint. And so I thought that, it's just so different when you read it in the context than when you...
Well, I'm sitting here wondering, especially with that verse, what about abusive situations? Because you may not have two witnesses, especially if somebody gets drunk and then beats
Right.
the wife.
Right,
But if it's a recurring deal, you're going to see injuries.
right.
And then it might be appropriate of, you did this to her, let's
Yes.
see how you enjoy it.
Right.
Do you want to continue this action or this course?
Yes, and everything had to fit. Like, you couldn't, take, lose an eye, you take my eye and then I take your life. Or you take my tooth and then I take both your eyes. It had to be just. And you're right, it would have, kind of like doing it to others, I guess. What you do to them is going to happen to you.
And you hear about a tooth and you think, that's not really that big a deal, but that was
That's
then.
huge.
That's
It
the
is if
only
you don't
way-
have any teeth.
It's
That's
huge.
right. It's the only way they had to eat.
Yes, then they
Well,
didn't have
teeth,
blenders.
and you work with a lot of people without teeth. And,
Yes.
it's a big deal. I
Yeah,
guess.
it is a
Well, I
big
take that
deal.
for granted. But we teach our children, if somebody does something to you, you don't
Right.
get them back. You don't hit
Right.
them. You just, and I was like, think about that.
But that was pre-Christ.
I know it's pre-Christ, but, I think maybe, I don't know what I think.
If the punishment physical, but I mean that's just this is a huge motivator. If I'm going to think twice before taking your eye if I know I'm going to lose mine. I mean it's a motivator.
And I'm not going to hit you if you're going to wallop me, you know.
Right, exactly. I'm not going to hit you for a hit
I
back.
mean, I'm not saying that's the right thing to do.
But I mean, that's what we're reading here. It is. It's absolutely right, and it gives a good motivation to not do that to someone else if you don't want it done to you. It's just amazing
And we're
wisdom
way
and justice.
far on the other end of
yeah.
all this.
And I mean, that's the other thing. You can't also take your injury and then expect.
Exploit it.
Yes, exactly. For overcompensation. Yeah,
So,
it's just
if you
it's
have-
perfect.
Extremely hot coffee spilled on
Yes.
you then get to
Yes,
spill
you
extremely
spill
hot
coffee on
coffee on someone else.
it. Exactly. And it's just
Yeah.
fair. Yeah.
I don't get millions of dollars from it.
See, I
I
know.
wonder if the CEO would have gone for that.
I know.
Probably have special pants made.
Maybe.
Spilled his own dadgum coffee on him. Nobody spilled it on him. No,
That's true.
you know.
Exactly. I know, but I mean, just in light of these silly things that we hear in the media, this is so brilliant and so perfect, and it would have really kept crime down, and it's
So
Well, it
as I
simplifies
raise
the
these
system.
babies, I
It
mean,
does.
I'm not raising my babies, I'm keeping them
Right.
for my daughter and
Yes.
son-in-law, but as I help with this,
yes,
and my little Clayton, he is he kind of pushes around on her, and I've always told her, don't do anything back, you come to Mama and I will take care of it.
right,
So I'm kind of like the judge,
yes.
should I tell her
Yes.
to just let him have it?
These days, she will, and
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think you have to tell her.
I know.
Well, she's pretty passive though. I mean, she kind of
Well, there
lets
comes a
him,
day.
Yeah,
3 and
Yes.
1. I mean, they're little, but you still want to start when they're
Yes.
young.
Yes, you do. Yes.
So I should definitely punish him when he punishes her.
Yes.
And most of the time you do, but sometimes you don't.
I know.
'cause
I
it
like what
happens
she said, to
14
restore
million
the
dollars.
relationship, because I'm all
Yeah.
about, okay, punish them, but to restore the
Yeah.
relationship, do something for her,
Right.
make it better.
Go get her the
It
ice
makes
pack.
them both
Go
feel
make her ice
bad.
pack. Yes,
That's
it does.
It
It
does.
does.
It's
does.
going on, but
Hopefully they would
restoration.
have the godly repentance or remorse.
Right.
Not sorry that they got in trouble, but
Right.
sorry that they've injured another.
Right.
And that through this act of helping them, it not only helps the victim,
Sure.
but it
Right.
helps them too.
Right. And to see what they've done.
Right.
The
And
injury
I
they've
remember
caused.
growing up, my parents, if we did something mean to somebody or something, then they would insist that we go make that
Yes.
right and do something to
You
make
have
it
to
right.
apologize. Yes.
So.
Yeah. But I just had a really great time studying this out. It's so interesting to me. I'm just in awe of it's just so good to go slowly and just absorb the wisdom.
It's a lot of checks and balances.
Yes, it's just perfect. And of course, they're becoming a nation, and they're going to, this is in the context of what we read in Leviticus about loving your neighbor as yourself. And this is what that looks like. This is what it looks like. If you don't want your eye taken out, then don't take somebody else's eye out. It's just living together. I mean, it's just perfect. It was so good. Okay, any other thoughts on the eye for an eye? Okay, go right along. And if a man strikes the eye of his male or female slave and destroys it, he shall let him go free on account of his eye. And if he knocks out a tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free on account of his tooth. So this one, you don't get to take your master's tooth, but you do get to go free, and you don't have to redeem yourself. There's no price to pay. You're just obviously it may not be a healthy relationship here.
But does that mean the master just turns them out without anything? Since they're free?
That's a good point. I don't know.
I would think they couldn't just turn them out and then them be
We
starving to
know
death.
with the women, they could not be left destitute and helpless at all.
I guess they'd be free to give themselves to somebody else.
Right.
As a slave.
To sell themselves to
Yeah,
another.
I've been
Yeah.
mistreated by this guy.
Yeah. Find someone nice.
Go find somebody else to work for.
Yeah.
But I guess that could be abused. The
Yes.
master could take out or
Yes.
injure somebody's tooth if he wanted to be set free of that obligation.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
instead of taking care of a woman for the rest of his life.
But the more logical thing to do would be to sell them. I mean, you could do that. You could trade. You could sell, and so that would be that. That's what I mean. This prevents. Really, the law is designed to prevent that kind. It gives a lot of motive to not.
And again, there'd be a priest
Yes.
or the men of the city would come and
Right.
make a judgment if
Yes.
there was conflict.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. None of this is just my.
Private
I say, you say.
Right.
No,
That's all
everything
we
was
have to
made
do.
public, and I mean, when we were studying it on the murder, I mean, everything had a very public, very fair trial, and it could be within the, that tribe, the Levites or the whatever, tribe of Judah, or it could be within that tribe, but I mean, it would be public and fair and just. Okay, I'm gonna read. I think 28 through 36, so we'll read to the end here. And if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall surely be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. If, however, an ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner had been warned, yet he does not confine it, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner also shall be put to death. If a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. Whether it gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. If the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. And if a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it over, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution. He shall give money to its owner, and the dead animal shall become his. And if one man's ox hurts another's so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox, divide its price equally, and also they shall divide the dead ox. Or if it is known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not confined it, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall become his. So here we're talking about, again, we've talked about this before, everything in Israel is about private ownership and personal responsibility. So the owner was responsible for their animals and their animals' behavior. How are we doing on time? Okay. So we have in verse 28, if an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall go unpunished. And by unpunished, it's just not an additional, because obviously they're going to lose their ox, and they don't get the meat from the ox. Yeah. So, do yours say ox or bull?
Bull
says
all
bull.
kinds of-
Yeah, some say bulls and some say ox. What does yours say?
Mine says bull, I was just looking at,
I
no, it says both.
was reading Little House on the Prairie books with
Mhm.
the kids, and the oxen was curious to me. And I thought, well, what is the difference? Because you see recipes for oxtails, and I thought, well, what in the world is an oxtail? So I looked it up. It's just a castrated bull.
Okay.
The steer.
But then the two translations are using them differently. Yeah, nowadays we call them steers. But technically, these are different things here. If one Bible's calling them, translation is calling them bulls, which are not castrated, and others are calling them ox, which are.
You would think the bull would be the one more prone to gore,
Well,
just by their
I don't
nature.
know.
from my family
Maybe
cow
it just does for
Facebook
both of them.
group,
Yeah.
female cows do it too.
I mean,
And a steer will too. Lots of times it just depends on what habits they got into
yeah.
as a cat.
I thought oxen and
They're more
Well,
burden.
according to
These
the
are more.
internet.
So it must be true.
In this point, I thought they were more burden-bearing work.
Yeah, because oxen were used for pulling and stuff like
Yes,
that.
and the bulls were more for
male
livestock.
cow for
Yeah.
pulling.
Mm-mm.
I don't know.
I don't know.
It talks about the goring, mine says it's a bull.
Okay.
When
Yes.
it talks about falling into a hole, it's an ox or a donkey.
Okay. Yeah. That's exactly.
Mine just went universally with oxen.
Mine did too. Okay. Well. Okay. I guess that's not the point. The
Probably
point here
neither
is that
here nor there.
yeah, right. Exactly. The point is the owner is responsible for its animal. Its animal's actions. Yes. But so if and again, placing value of life. Yeah, human life is worth something, and the ox is stoned, and the meat is lost. But the owner is not punished beyond that. So the owner's not going to face the death penalty because his ox.
It's kind of like if you have a dog that is
Yes.
potentially a pit or something like that, and it gets out and it gets somebody, then the dog is put down, but you may be liable
Yes,
in that
for all the.
situation. Some kind of payment, like the payment was the oxen meat or whatever.
Well,
you know.
we're going to read that scenario next because you're right. We've had that incident on the east side of town in Lawton just recently.
Judge Judy has it all the time.
Does she?
Stuff like that.
Okay, so verse 29, if, however, an ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, yet he does not confine it, and it kills a man or woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner shall also be put to death. So you're absolutely responsible for your animal. And if you know, like you're saying, because they've had that out there with that pit bull, and yeah, it's just very interesting. So yes, but here, if you know and you don't lock up your ox or whatever, then the owner dies. Okay, verse 30. If a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded of him. So this is going to go so if you know your ox has a habit of goring, it's a dangerous ox, you refuse to lock it up, it gets out, it kills a man, well then you deserve the death penalty. Okay, and then it says, if a ransom is demanded of him, then he shall give for the redemption of his life whatever is demanded. And I love how it calls it a redemption and a ransom. This is saying, I deserve to die. I know I deserve, but I'm going to buy my life back. So you pay a ransom, and you're actually acknowledging I deserve to die, but I'm buying my life. So he didn't have to die because of his bull, but he did have to pay, redeem his life. Okay. And so this is, the first scenario is if a man or woman, and then the next scenario in verse 31, whether it gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. So a man or woman is your own son or daughter. And then verse 32, if the ox gores a male or female slave, and it's interesting that this is put in a different category, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So if it kills one of your servants, so if the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So it's assuming that it's killed another person's slave.
Property.
Right, yes. And so, but does the 30 shekels of silver ring a bell? Yeah. So if we have time, I really wanted to look at that because it's so interesting in Matthew 26. And this is just a tangent, I guess, bunny trail. But Matthew 26. Just in this context, this was just, so Matthew chapter 26, verses 14, 15, and 16. Then one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me to deliver him up to you?" And they weighed out to him 30 pieces of silver. And from then on, he began looking for a good opportunity to betray him. So Judas, a Jew, goes to the high priest, or the chief priest, who are Hebrew. And mind you, these people know the law. They know the law. And Judas says, "What will you give me?" And they count out 30 pieces of silver, which is the price of a slave. I mean, and they knew, like, his life is worth that of a slave. So, and it's interesting because he's quoting here from Zechariah, and this is really a tangent, but Zechariah 11, 12 and 13. So Zechariah 11, verses 12 and 13. And this is obviously prophesying about that event.
What is it again?
It's in Zechariah,
What?
chapter 11,
Okay.
verses 12 and 13. I don't know, it's how I remembered it in my head. "And I said to them, If it is good in your sight, give me my wages, but if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages." Let's see what that. In the King James Version, they translate, "Give me my price, and if not, forbear." So they weighed out for my price 30 pieces of silver. Then the Lord said to me, "Throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them." So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord. And so, of course, this is prophesying about that, but it's interesting, throw it to the potter, because from what I understand, the potter would have been the least paid. Like, it was the lowest wage earner here, and they throw him the 30 pieces of silver, and then he says, "At which price I was valued by them." So that's what they thought of him worth the. I mean, and Judas doesn't say, "I'll betray him," or they don't seek him out. Well, he just says, "What will you give me?" And then 30 pieces of silver, which is the price of a slave, the life of a slave, which I just thought was so. And it's very interesting when you read all of 26, and it talks about the alabaster jar, a costly perfume that's lavished on him. And then in John's account, we see when they do that, Judas is the one who says, "We could have sold that for 300 denarii and fed the poor," and yet valued Christ's life at that of a
But
slave.
God is the potter.
And that's what
Yeah.
you and I are on the same
Yeah.
page. It must be because we're
Yeah,
beside each other.
yeah, isn't that fun?
He's the potter, we're the
We're the clay,
That's how he's referred to.
Yeah,
So he's the lowliest person in the temple, and that would be God is
the
the potter.
lowest wage for
The least shall be first, and the first
First
shall be
shall be
last.
Well,
So,
and the humble servant. I thought of Philippians 2, and just a humble servant. And he abandoned his heavenly home to come here, and they worth the price of a slave. Okay. Anyway, that was just an interesting FYI. So when you read that, you'll know that's what they would pay for the price of a slave. And then they stone the ox. And then the last few verses, "And if a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it over, and an ox or a donkey falls into it, the owner of the pit shall make restitution, and he shall give money to its owner, and the dead animal shall become his." So, right, he makes compensation for. So he's actually buying the ox from him, but it's dead. So I guess he still gets the
Like you
meat.
buy it.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Good point. Yes. Excellent. And then verse 35: "If one man's ox hurts another so that it dies, then they shall sell the live ox, divide the price equally, and then divide the meat of the dead ox." So I mean, like it's just It's just so just and fair and right. "Or if it is known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, yet its owner has not confined it, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead animal shall become his." So in other words, I get your dead ox and you get a live ox in its place. It's just so just and so right. So, any other thoughts or questions, or just the kindness of God, the details, just he's so just.